civilian Afghan friends, is it curious to you that he would ask them where the Taliban is rather than simply hide out with them?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if Private Bergdahl left his post and intended, as you say, to wander across the mountains, perhaps to India, do you think it's curious that he would be asking his friends in Afghanistan where the Taliban is rather than just hanging out and hiding with his friends?
Yes.
Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures, TTPs, that describes how we conduct operations, what is the established order for conducting any particular task or operation in the Army. Is that correct?
Yes.
In the missions after Private Bergdahl's disappearance, did it appear that the Afghan enemy had greater knowledge of your unit's TTPs, such as where you park after an IED or how you react to an ambush?
I don't know if they had greater knowledge after he did disappear. I don't know if another player moved into the area or whatnot, but after he did disappear, yeah, ambushes picked up, cover and concealment was used. They hit us hard after he left. IEDs were moved in different directions, and they were, instead of taking a tire or a front end off a vehicle, they were hitting direct hits on the vehicles.
And that would be consistent with Private Bergdahl being held in captivity by Taliban or Haqqani network and breaking under interrogation and sharing those TTPs, correct?
I don't know. I wasn't there while he was, held under captivity. I don't know what he told him. I wasn't there.
Could also be consistent with the fact that he willingly shared those TTPs with the Taliban or Haqqani network, correct?
Like I said, I don't know what he told him, what he didn't tell him. I wasn't there.
When you were conducting missions in the days and the weeks after his disappearance, did any of your NCOs or your platoon leader or company commander raise the possibility that Private Bergdahl might be a security risk himself if you were to find him on the battlefield?
Our main focus at that point was just trying to find him and get him back. No matter how, who, or when, that was our main focus from the time he left until about 2.5 months later. It was every day trying to find this guy.
Were you asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of your Article 15.6 investigation?
I was asked to sign a media gag order. There was other people in my platoon that were asked to sign an official NDA with, a field grade officer present that witnessed them sign it.
Mr. Waltz, have you ever heard of a non-disclosure agreement?
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jacobson, obviously we've heard testimony today, and there have been some reports of some unusual behavior attributed to Sergeant Bergdahl. And obviously our great American soldiers overwhelmingly are able to sustain the stresses and difficulties of combat without exhibiting unusual behaviors that have been described both during this hearing and in the media. Is there a system or process in place to evaluate the behavior of a soldier to make a determination as to whether or not it's related to the combat operations or related to his or her service?
Congressman, speaking from my own experience, there were the first line of defense when you have a soldier who's a problem or not doing things right is his chain of command. That could include their NCOs and the officers above them. There are also, during my time in Afghanistan, there was a great deal of effort expended to make sure that there were preventive mental health clinics and places where soldiers could go. I cannot speak to the specifics of any of this with regards to Bergdahl, though.
But there's a system in place to monitor members of the armed forces to ensure that we're understanding the impact of being in combat and the stresses of their service.
That's my understanding, especially over the last decade.
And in addition to that, one of the reasons there's a process to conduct a hearing and an investigation and a review of those facts to make a determination as to whether or not someone has deserted or something else is going on. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And there's a process that will happen, in fact, in this case, as it relates to this individual.
In fact, the Department of Defense earlier this week announced that there'll be a 2-star general who will be leading the overall investigation. We've heard Army Chief of Staff Odierno say that there will be a full investigation, and that was echoed by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey.
So we have, in addition to that, we have this other principle about ensuring that we leave no soldier behind. It's part of kind of the warrior ethos. It's part of the soldier's creed. It's a deeply held American belief and practice. that we leave no soldier behind, and we do everything we can to secure the release of any American who's caught in time of war, correct?
That is something that I believe in. That is something that I think that even if you don't like the circumstances of someone being captured, you believe it's necessary to go and get them.
So why wouldn't we do this hearing and investigation and all the kinds of things that are going to happen now before we secure the release of an American? Couldn't we do it that way?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, my point is we can't conduct an investigation, the kind of investigation that is required and that is underway prior to securing the release of the prisoner of war in most instances.
I think that would be very difficult because you want to interview the individual captured. That's why, as I said before, there was an initial investigation that was by definition incomplete.
And so it makes sense then that we do everything we can to secure the release of every American prisoner of war. And then if in fact an investigation proves that they have done something improper or engaged in some misconduct, they will of course be punished in an appropriate way. And in this case, if in fact this individual turns out to be having deserted under the military code of justice, he could face up to you said, a death sentence.
Yes, I think now I understand that death is a possible punishment too. I would note that the last American deserter prosecuted, Charles Jenkins, he had left his post on the DMZ in Korea, the demilitarized zone in Korea in the 60s. When he came back to the United States, 2006-2008 time frame, he was court-martialed, sentenced to 26 days confinement, and then given a dishonorable discharge. That's a range, that comes after the investigation and after charges are referred and there's a trial and all.
And Dr. Jacobs, my final question is, what do you think the impact would be on our American military if our men and women did not know that this country was committed to securing their release and to undertaking every imaginable effort to bring them home?
I think first that would shatter the bonds of trust between the soldiers and the American people, the chain of command. Secondly, I think that it could be an enormous propaganda coup for our enemies when they have these people in captivity that we don't care about. It would signal in many ways that we no longer are committed to our men and women in uniform.
Thank you, Dr. James. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman kneels back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Cook, Colonel Cook, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Andrews, I know it's tough to be here. As someone that's been in combat, the second hardest duty, and I don't know, probably the hardest duty is to actually go up to your parents or the spouses and to tell them that their son or daughter is no longer with them. It is very tough and everything you've gone through. You have my heartfelt condolences. Specialist, if you could bear with me some of the questions. I understand that his weapon was left behind.
That's correct.
All his ammunition.
Ammunition, night vision, his plate carrier.
Night vision device was left behind.
Yes, all sensitive items were left behind. A couple days before that, he had asked another platoon member what would happen if one of his sensitive items went missing. Did that certain soldier get in trouble? That certain soldier responded with yes. So Bergdahl left all his sensitive items.
Did he have access to radio freaks?
He would, but he didn't have a radio with him.
No, but just the frequencies themselves. They were all pre-programmed into the radio.
Standard procedure when dust one happens, you change the radio frequency.
Yeah. Okay. Any maps or GPS systems at all that went with him, or was that all up?
I don't know if he had a map on him, but GPS was sensitive equipment. He didn't have that.
Okay. I think there's been a lot of talk about desertion and everything else. Correct me if I'm wrong, but usually in a situation like that, desertion is pretty much an admin term because one of the elements that you have to prove is permanent desertion. So an individual that would disappear from the unit, I don't know, all the instances that I had, and I was a legal officer when I came back from the unit, and it's normally just unauthorized absence. That's one of the charges because you have to prove permanent desertion from the unit. Am I correct or incorrect on that?
That is correct. AWOL also turns into desertion after 30 days.
administratively normally, so that they're carried on that. But once they turn themselves in or what have you, that turns them in. Okay, a couple of things in terms of just trust in the unit. I get the impression that the unit itself, and I really believe in the code of conduct. I believe in taking care of everybody in the unit and to give your life for somebody like that. But I get the feeling that you lost full trust and confidence in that individual, that he would be on your right flank or your left flank. In other words,
As far as the rest of the platoon?
no, you, and if you could, if you had any opinions what the feeling of the rest of the platoon was.
Well, the rest of the platoon were brothers. None of the rest of us walked off on our own free will.
No, but I meant the attitude of this individual that was missing in action.
He walked off on his own accord. If he never would have walked off, he never would have been held in captivity. The rest of us fought for the guy to our left and our right, and in front and back. And I don't know how he felt about us, but we all felt strongly that we would give our lives for him.
Okay. In terms of the Taliban, and I'm not going to go into the surprise, that we weren't notified, but just an impact on a combat unit that is fighting that organization, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, that 5 of their top leaders, 5 of the ones that call the strategy, 5 of the ones that kill Americans, 5 of the ones that are involved in terrorism, are released. What kind of psychological impact do you think that would have to the unit, aside from Bergdahl?
Well, if my high-ranking members of my organization were released back to me, I feel pretty good about getting my top-level guys back, personally.
And I understand that, but from the standpoint of the fact that the Taliban, you're basically the enemy that you're trying to track down, find, and everything else, that the impact that, hey, they're back there calling the shots, would that have a demoralizing impact on the unit if you were still with that unit, of course?
Oh, no, I think American forces are going to do whatever they can every single day, do what they're supposed to do. I don't think they're really worried about anybody else.
Okay. Mr. Waltz, in terms of permanent impact on policy in regards, have we set a precedence by doing this in regards to all the other terrorist groups?
I believe we have, Congressman. I believe we've set a dangerous precedent, and I'd encourage this body to look closely at future efforts towards release and calls to close Guantanamo. We had these gentlemen detained. Men and women gave their lives to detain them. Now, unfortunately, I believe men and women will give their lives to capture or kill them once again.
Thank you. I want to thank the panel. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and again, thank you for holding this hearing. I want to add my condolences to the Andrews family, sir, to yourself and to your wife, and I hope that the chemotherapy that we heard about just a little while ago is successful, sir. And your son obviously clearly was a hero, and thank God for him. And Specialist Full, too, we want to thank you, and I want to thank you for your service to our nation. Mr. Waltz, you also obviously for the great service you've done. Mr. Jacobson, I want to ask you a little bit, because earlier on everyone was thanked for their service except for you. Do you remember that? You were kind of cut off. You weren't thanked for your service. Do you remember that?
I heard a lot of thanks for service.
Okay, what was your service? Because at one point everyone was thanked except for you. I thought you were in uniform for a while too.
I did. I served enlisted in the United States Army Reserve from 1993 through 2001 with service in Bosnia. I then took a U.S. Navy commission as an intelligence officer and continue to serve in the Navy Reserve today.
Okay, thank you. I thought so. I wasn't sure about that. I just wanted to make sure. So I want to thank you also for your service. Thank you.
You're welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. Obviously the issue here is the principle, I think, of do we exchange, do we negotiate, do we leave people behind? And obviously, I mean, we've read a lot about what us politicians say, and I won't take the time to read it. I was going to read from the congressional record because it's interesting what politicians say when it's beneficial to them. And there's lots of interesting things being said, both sides. But I'd like to know what the military thinks about this. Mr. Waltz, you seem to have a good ear to what the Joint Chiefs of Staff and others are saying. What do they say about this deal? Are they criticizing it? Are they in favor of it? Have they been critical of it? Do you know what the Joint Chiefs have said or what they believe?
Congressman, obviously we have civilian oversight of the military, and our most senior leaders are supportive of this policy. I can tell you from the rank and file, anecdotally, that are reaching out to me, they're just as furious and resentful as we were at the time. And I think things have been handled a little bit differently. There had been a quiet reunion with the family, and Sergeant Bergdahl hadn't been immediately. There hadn't been a rush to judgment to call him a hero and tell the world he served with distinction. You would have seen a much more muted reaction.
The principle of getting them back. And I was very curious when I listened to you, and you said that, I believe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe you said something. We were out there looking for him, and we were trying hard, and we should have. Although we resented it, we were doing it. I mean, it sounded like you were doing what you thought we should have done.
That's right. I don't know of many folks who debate the principle that we should get every American back. I think what's debated and what's controversial is, one, his treatment when it was announced, but then two, the price we paid. And I personally believe the price was too high. Some people draw the line at Abu Sheikh Mohammed. I draw the line at the top 5 senior Taliban members that were requested by the Taliban to come back.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Jacobs, I'm going to ask you the same question again. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. What about that notion? Do you know where the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where are they on this? Are they against it? Are the military in favor of it? If they are, why? Or would you comment on that?
I mean, I could only refer back in terms of the serving military leadership to the public statements made by Chairman of the Joint Staff Dempsey, General Odierno, and others. But two of my personal heroes who retired from the military, General Jim Mattis and General Stanley McChrystal, have been unequivocal in their support for that concept. And I'm proud to stand where they are on this. I do understand that some feel that it's the right thing to do, but they don't have to like it. There are a lot of missions in the military that soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are very happy to do. That's why they're professionals, and they don't like it. At the same time, I think what makes our nation so great is that I've spoken to many individuals who actually are very content with this and didn't have a problem doing it. But I would find it strange if there was any less disagreement over the how much one enjoyed having to do this, or whether or not we should have done it. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't that disagreement in them.